Let's start with this news that we're hearing. Again, we've only heard this in the last 10 minutes or so, but there are headlines that China is investigating NVIDIA over what they say is a suspected violation of anti-monopoly law. NVIDIA shares right now down by about 2%. And I think our first question was, wait a second, do they even sell chips to China? Turns out they do. I think in the July quarter, they sold something like 12% of their revenue, $3.7 billion, accounted for sales in China. What do you think of this news?
I mean, I think we just have to get ready and just get used to this kind of thing, right? Because last week, the U.S. barred semiconductor companies from selling any chips to China. And that's one of the reasons why Applied Materials fell pretty substantially, Lam Research. Those companies have almost 30% of their revenues to Chinese companies. So you can see why they fell. 12% is probably manageable, Becky, but I just think we're going to have to get used to this. It's back and forth, and that's one of the reasons why I think the semiconductors have actually paused, right? I mean, NVIDIA and Broadcom have been the stellars. They've been the standouts. And I think they will be the long-term winners for years and years to come. But I do think that they've had a nice run, and overall the semiconductors over the last couple of years have had a nice run. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see, just some volatility, and maybe they pause for a bit. That's one of the reasons why software has done so well, because you're seeing money come out of semis and go into software.
To Jim's point, it's interesting that NVIDIA is down pre-market. China says it is investigating the chip maker over possible violations of the country's anti-monopoly law. The nation's antitrust regulator adds the company suspected of violating commitments that it made during its 2020 acquisition of Mellanox. The probe comes in the wake of U.S. actions aimed, of course, at restricting chip sales in China.
Yeah, they should have thought of that before. I mean, Mellanox was a deal that everybody just said, look, we're going to give it an incredible amount of scrutiny, and they did that. This is not like the Google contract to Apple in order to be able to keep us at the default, David. Now, you know that it could be, you can't have this kind of remorse years later and think you're going to have an impact. What do you think? You know, CFIUS, what can they do to retaliate against us? What is their? They can't break up a deal.
I'm saying CFIUS is here.
No, I'm saying
sorry. What are you talking about?
We block deals, but once the deals go through, we tend not to reopen them.
That is typically the case.
I think that was also. I thought that was also the way of China. Once they've approved something, gave it a hard look.
I don't know enough, nor do I think many know enough about the Chinese antitrust regulatory apparatus to make assumptions.
You mean you make it sound like it's in flux?
I think it's difficult to know, and it will be even more difficult to discern.
What can they do? Why would you sell the stock?
We do get into another more heated trade war with.
Okay,
with China.
Look, the stock was going down 3 on Friday. I would tell you somebody obviously had this because there was nothing else going on. But what can you do? Why would you sell NVIDIA on this? They're going to kick them out for the hobbled. Remember I told you they have a hobbled chip that goes to them?
Yes.
What are they going to do?
All right, so you think it's much ado about nothing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do.
Okay.
I think it's much ado about nothing. Look, the people who are selling it now in this market, they want to make themselves look right. They'll sell it down to 138 so they can say, hey, I told you Cramer doesn't know anything. Like I matter.
Did you write last week that maybe there's some earlier news on Rubin, which would allow you to build in some better numbers for 25?
Well, so we all know about Blackwell, and then the next chip's Rubin. In between, there's a chip called Blackwell Ultra, which is going to potentially boost the back half of next calendar year. However, NVIDIA does seem to be asking their supply chain and their memory makers, hey, can you pull this thing up? We want to get Rubin out a little sooner. And the evidence is just stacking up. Now, of course, these launches are very complex. These are very complex chips, but it's good to see them wanting to keep to that one-year cadence. And if Rubin does get pulled up in 2026 calendar, you could see faster growth in the hundreds of basis points we said. And then that helps. There's a lot of folks right now going, Ben, I get it. Next year's growing 50% plus. What about 26? Well, these are the types of things. If we get 30% growth instead of 20, that stock's going much higher.
NVIDIA, as you know, is one of the most iconic businesses of the last decade. Shares up nearly 27,000, that's right, 27,000% over the last 10 years and nearly 200% this year alone. A key figure behind the company's rise, of course, is CEO and founder Jensen Huang. Our next guest spoke with him exclusively for his new book titled The NVIDIA Way, Jensen Huang and the Making of a Tech Giant. The book hits shelves tomorrow. Barron's senior tech writer Tay Kim joins us here at Post 9, also a former Bloomberg and CNBC writer. Congratulations, Tay. Great to have you.
Thanks, Carl. So good to be here.
You talked to him for the book, right?
Yes.
When was that?
It was in June of this year. I had an hour with him right after his Caltech commencement speech.
How much of the book looks at the origins, which are fascinating just on their own, and then the culture, and how the cultures allowed them to do what they do?
I'd say it's about half and half. It's a business history of the full 30 years of the company, and then a lot of it is focused on their distinctive, unique culture, which I think is the reason why they've been so successful. I mean, it's like extraordinary outcome. Like you said, the stock performance is incredible. It's actually the best performing U.S. stock in history, with any stock with 20-year returns.
You make the point that a lot of it is due to Jensen's blend of being a technical genius and then a business genius.
Yes. So he has that unique combination that I think most CEOs don't have. Every time there's an instance of where they're almost about to go out of business, he's resilient and resourceful. He comes out with solutions and funding that just come out of nowhere. And he's always been super charismatic ever since the beginning. There was a time in the late 1990s when Intel was trying to snuff them out, telling PC makers, don't buy NVIDIA chips, we're coming out with something better. Their sales pipeline completely dried up. And Jensen went to his workforce. He's famous for saying every 30 days, we're about to go out of business. And this time it was true. They're running out of money. And he told his employees, Intel is out to get us. Don't make no mistake. We have to fight back and kill Intel. And that sounds a little, superficial, whatever. But the employees were inspired. They were working past midnight. One employee told me that she woke up at like 4 or 5 in the morning and said, "Oh, I just worked at midnight. I really want to go back to sleep, but no, I have to wake up. We must kill Intel, kill Intel." So she's like muttering in her head. She was inspired to work harder to fight.
Tay, if Intel's, let's call it a handful of decisions by former CEOs, doomed the company to some extent, what are the decisions that, on the other side, that Jensen made that obviously brought such great success? Are there a couple that you could cite?
I think one key thing is they talk about speed of light, working with extreme speed and velocity. And if you look back at their video game history in the 1990s, they accelerated the product cycle from 18 months to 6 months. I mean, that sounds incredible, right? Typically, a chip took 18 months to design and ship. And they said, no, we're going to do that every 6 months. And that drove all their competitors out of business. And they're doing the same exact playbook with AI. It used to take 2 years to make an AI GPU. And then October of last year, they're like, no, we're going to do that every single year. And that kind of relentless execution, improvement has shown why they've been successful for the last 30 years.
What I like is that you trace it all the way back to when they were a startup. Often, though, this is a very different company than it was back then. When the company gets very big, it changes,
yes.
Right? Structure, culture, innovation, that sort of desire to go out and kill and compete. What's your sense of what's happening now that it's become a multi-trillion-dollar company leading AI?
So that's exactly the main point. The key thing that happens, I think, for most corporations in the U.S. is as they get larger, this dysfunction just breeds inside the company. You get endless meetings, indecisive paralysis. Some of the sources told me it's like swimming in quicksand trying to get decisions done. And at Google, Microsoft, Apple, just the bureaucracy goes insane. NVIDIA, Jensen's culture has been able to tamper that down. I mean, if you do anything where you're trying to make your boss's boss better, which I think is a big portion of all the internal politics and bureaucracy, he'll dress you down right in public. And he told me, if someone is ever doing that, like, I'll embarrass them in front of everyone. And if I do that once or twice, no one's ever going to do that again. So that kind of like flat organization and hating internal politics and slowness, he's so paranoid of being disrupted by a startup that's faster. So he's been able to kind of drive NVIDIA, even though it's 30,000 employees, at the speed of a startup.
Right. We get a taste of his management philosophy sometimes when he speaks publicly, but we can't wait to dive into this book. Tay, congratulations once again.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much for having
NVIDIA
me.
Way, Jensen Huang, and the making of a tech giant.
Caps. Now take a look at NVIDIA versus the equal weight semis. Within this sector, it seems to me there's a bit of a seesaw trade going on, playing the dispersion of NVIDIA relative to the rest, especially if you look since NVIDIA reported earnings November 20th. You see, NVIDIA's kind of done not much of anything and actually had a little bit of a downward tilt here while you have the average semiconductor stock going up. Obviously, NVIDIA is the big known growth story, the quality in the group, and you see how it's essentially almost trading reverse of the rest of the sector. We'll see if that holds up. Sometimes this is just about crowded positioning, kind of rectifying itself in the short term, guys.
All right, speaking of semis, NVIDIA falling more than 2.5% today after a Chinese regulator opened an investigation into the chip maker for potential violation of the country's anti-monopoly law. This as China leaders promised more proactive fiscal measures next year to boost the economy. That sent shares of JD.com, PDD, Baidu, and Alibaba jumping 7% or more. For more on what the stimulus could mean, let's bring in CNBC contributor DeWardrick McNeil. He's the managing director at Longview Global. DeWardrick, great to see you. I first want to tackle this NVIDIA issue in the probe there. Let's be clear, is this retaliation?
Melissa, it will certainly be perceived that way by many here in Washington and elsewhere. You know, China has spent several years building out a large toolkit of statecraft tools like the anti-monopoly law, the anti-foreign sanctions law, the unreliable entities list. And we're seeing these actions of companies being added to these lists after the U.S. has taken actions that China dislike. The perception will be NVIDIA was added to, or at least the investigation was announced under the anti-monopoly law after the U.S. last week tightened restrictions on semiconductors. We've seen this with Skydio after the U.S. sold drones to Taiwan. And so I haven't seen the details. There certainly may be some legitimate monopoly issues here. This dates back to a 2020 purchase of Mellanox Technology. So people will wonder, well, what took 4 years to get us here, lending more credibility to this being a retaliatory action versus one that's really based on the economic fundamentals of antitrust.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. The S&P closed about 0.6% lower today, and NVIDIA finished the day down about 2.5%. This is following news that China is investigating NVIDIA regarding potential violations of Chinese anti-monopoly laws. I'll be completely honest, I am not concerned about this situation, and I think it is just short-term noise. Here's the thing, I don't expect China to stop NVIDIA from selling chips to Chinese companies. China wants their own companies to compete with NVIDIA, but right now NVIDIA's technology is so far ahead of their Chinese competitors that it would be crazy for China to prevent NVIDIA from selling chips to Chinese companies. And so I really do think this is just short-term noise. I'm still bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA for multiple reasons. Demand for Blackwell is insane. Hyperscalers have yet to show any signs of reducing their capex on AI. NVIDIA has a massive competitive moat that no other company is even close to breaching. Jensen Huang has said that NVIDIA will ship more Blackwell in the fourth quarter than they originally expected. And we have a clear product roadmap from NVIDIA for the next 2 years with the launch of Blackwell this year. Blackwell Ultra in 2025 and Rubin in 2026. Before NVIDIA's most recent earnings report, I said repeatedly that I would not be surprised if this company were to double over the next 2 years. And after NVIDIA's most recent earnings, I still think that is a very plausible outcome. Many analysts expect NVIDIA to grow 50% in 2025, but I honestly think that is a conservative estimate. I think we are likely to see growth exceeding 50% given NVIDIA's upcoming product cycles and NVIDIA's track record of routinely exceeding analyst expectations. As long as everything remains peaceful in the Pacific, and as long as none of the hyperscalers significantly reduce their capex spending on AI, then I think NVIDIA should be just fine for at least the next 1 to 2 years. At least that's how I view the situation. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.